Day 9 in Scotland. We left Dalmally and headed toward Isle of Skye. Just before the Skye Bridge, there is a beautiful castle, Eilean Dunan Castle, perched on a stretch of land that's surrounded completely by water. This castle had a different feeling than the other ones did. And I think that's something I really loved about the trip, was that each castle we went to had such a different feeling to it. This one was the kind of place you could easily imagine all those Selkie and mermaid stories coming to fruition. Here, like many of the castles, it was easy to build up stories, to imagine lives, to think and build worlds as you clambered up new sets of stairs, wondering to which floor it might take you, or pushed open heavy doors. To me, the overwhelming feeling of Eilean Dunan Castle was one of high romance, something deep and mythic. After Eilean Dunan Castle, we traveled over the sea to Skye. And yes, I did sing the Skyboat song a million zillion times. Skye, with its landscape of great and wild mountains, was absolutely enchanting. As was the lovely cottage we had the opportunity to stay at, Riverview Cottage near Portree. The next day, we headed out to the Fairy Glen, a place I was especially looking forward to as I had read so much about this strange place with weird little hills and a lovely bed of water and a castle-like rock formation. The place had a lovely and lively energy that made it easy to invent up stories and be a little silly.
I want adventure in the great life somewhere. There's lots of fairies here. Science knows it. Anthropologists know it. Even fairyologists know it. Yes, it's been confirmed. That's one of them right now. We gotta go. Bye.
The Fairy Glen, like many places in Scotland, was the kind of place you wished you could linger around all day. The wild array of greens, quirky features like hills that rose up without reason, rocks that lay in a circle with even less sense. The Fairy Glen made you sure that if you stayed only a little longer, only a little while more, that perhaps you might see something enchanting, something wild beneath a turned stone or around the corner of just another hill. After a good measure of lingering, we headed onward to hike the Quarring. At first, we were completely lost. Unlike the hike we did in Glencoe, this one had no visible path from the road to the mountain. Instead, we had to just park and start wandering. And wander we did. Not knowing if there was ever going to be a path, we decided to just follow our instinct, head in the direction of the mountain and go where we pleased. After running up a huge hill, only to find we probably hadn't taken the easiest path, we caught sight of some hikers and, following a water vein, found the path. And this was one of the things I really loved about our trip. was the opportunity to wander and explore, to possibly get lost, to have to track our steps and make our own way. As we got higher up, a wind picked up, one that threatened to sweep you off the mountain, one that felt like a fairy curse, and one that at one point pushed me over. Luckily, I was leaning the right way. After that, the only rational thing was a dram of scotch, then a pint, and a good meal. The next day we drove north from Portree, where we followed a small river in the direction of great coupling of mountains until we found the fairy pools. After having seen how red the water at the Devil's Pulpit was, we shouldn't have been so surprised by what we found. But the blue-green waters of the fairy pool were something not easily or quickly taken in. I found it impossible to resist, and quickly found myself very happy and very cold as I took a dip in the beautiful but icy water.
You're way braver than I am.
It's actually warmer right here.
It took a few brave attempts, but armed with a hair tie, I managed to sink down in the icy cold, enchanted fairy pools.
But it's like crisp, like this like freezer water. Are you filming me?
Yeah.
After that, we meandered to the Talisker distillery, then for a cup of cappuccino. And on our way to our next destination, we saw many a Highland cruise. And then Nest Point Lighthouse. The next day was perfectly moody, perfectly misty, with only a touch of rain and of course a good walloping of wind. All perfect elements for hiking the Old Man's Store.
What do you think of Old Man's Store?
Pretty cool.
Do you think it's really an old man?
Yeah.
Why do you think he's up there?
Don't know.
Like at the Quarrying, hiking the store didn't come with much in the way of directions, with the exception, of course, of the signs which warned falling rocks and proceed at own risk. So we wandered, and we found ourselves climbing higher and higher until as we traveled up a water vein, I noticed the ground beneath us become less and less solid rock and more dirt and chunks of rock. It felt as though the whole mountain could crumble under your foot. It was frightening, but exciting. It was a true adventure. Afterwards, we drove out to Kiltrock Viewpoint, and were fortunate enough that there was bagpipe music playing while we enjoyed the scenic view of the rock formation like a kilt. Then it was back to Portree, our last night in the colorful little village, enjoying the sights, the atmosphere, the old town feel, and of course, a dram and a pint. Early the next morning, we left Skye and headed northeast toward the village of Domnedrod. Here, we visited Urquhart Castle, a castle famously fought over for the strategic location. A castle filled with stories of great hunting parties, tragic romance, and historic sorrow. But most importantly, a castle that sits on the great loch where a wild creature Nessie is said to roam. I could not be so sure whether it was imagination or second sight. It made me believe a rippling in the water might be something more. En route to Inverness, we stopped at the cutest little cafe with the happiest sort of spirit. If you're ever in the area, you have to stop at Cafe 82. From Inverness, we traveled to Cloddenmore. And then, it was one last night in Scotland. And just like that, it was time to go home. Altogether, the trip was meant to serve a twofold purpose. One, as a reward to finally see many of the things I've been reading and studying about all these last few years. And two, to serve as inspiration for my writing. Sitting at home, I can certainly say that both aims were successful. Though, I hadn't expected it to make my heart ache so much. To yearn for those mountains and the wild, wild wind.